The sky above Tryon 7 was red with dust. The refugee camp sat like a broken shell in the middle of the wasteland. Tents were torn, the ground was cracked, and the air smelled like metal and ash. People didn't speak much here. They were too tired, too hungry, and too afraid in the center of the camp. Children sat on the cold ground. Their faces were thin. Their eyes too large for their heads. Most of them were alien kids, small, fragile, with strange colors on their skin. Pain looked the same. No matter the species, the food lines had ended hours ago. Only one meal remained, just one nutrient bar, dry and gray. A guard handed it to the last person in line. That person was a human. He was tall, but thin, wearing a dirty Earth Forces jacket. His name was Rian, but no one here knew that yet. He didn't speak when he received the food. He just stared at the small bar in his hand. Karan stood nearby, hidden behind the ruins of an old supply tent. She watched everything. Her people had taught her to observe, to learn before trusting. And what she saw now made her breath catch in her throat. The human didn't eat. He didn't even look around for a safe place to hide the food. Instead, he turned, walked toward the group of children, and knelt down in the dirt. A tiny alien girl was crying softly, her ribs clearly visible through her skin. Rian opened the packet and broke the bar in half. He gave the bigger half to the little girl, and the other half to a boy next to her. The children looked at him, confused at first, then quickly grabbed the food. Their small hands trembled as they ate. Karan narrowed her eyes. Why would he do that? Humans were supposed to be selfish, cruel, only looking out for their own kind, at least. That's what her elders always said. But this human, he didn't speak. He didn't boast. He just sat there, watching the kids eat. His stomach growled, loud enough for even Karan to hear it, but he didn't move. Others in the camp began to notice. Whispers spread like wind. Did he just give up his only food? Two strangers, a human? Some aliens laughed in disbelief. Others shook their heads, but a few stared at him with something new in their eyes, respect. Karan felt something stir inside her. Not hunger, not fear, but curiosity. She stepped closer, keeping her hand near the small knife on her belt. The human didn't even glance at her. Instead, he stood slowly, wiped his hands on his pants, and walked away from the children, back toward the cold wall of the shelter dome. He sat down, knees pulled to his chest, and closed his eyes. Karan walked to the children. The little girl was still licking her fingers. The boy had crumbs on his chin and a small smile. "Who is he?" she asked. The boy shrugged. He didn't say anything, he just gave it to us. Karan looked back at the human. He was shivering now, his body thin and worn. He had nothing, no friends, no family, no tribe, but still, he gave. Why? The wind blew across the camp, carrying dust and silence. Karan had seen warriors, hunters, leaders, and thieves, but she had never seen someone give their last food to children they didn't know. Not even her own kind would do that. The human didn't look like a hero. He looked broken. But the children looked at him with wide eyes. One of them whispered, "He's like an elder." Karan's heart skipped. No one gave that title lightly, not even among the tribes of Tryon. An elder was someone who gave more than they took, who protected without reward, who stood when others ran. She glanced at the guards. None of them noticed. To them, he was still just a human, just another mouth they didn't want to feed. But Karan saw something else now, something quiet but powerful. This human wasn't just another outsider. He was something different, and in that moment, she knew she would keep watching him, because maybe, just maybe, he was what this broken place needed. Not a soldier, not a king, but a man with an empty plate and a full heart. The night was cold on Tryon 7, colder than usual, and the small shelters built from scrap metal did little to keep the wind out. Rian sat with his arms wrapped around his knees, his breath forming little clouds in the air. He hadn't eaten all day, but he didn't seem to care. Not after what he'd done earlier. Not after giving away his last meal to children who needed it more. Inside one of the nearby domes, Karan couldn't sleep. Her mind kept going back to the moment she saw him kneel and hand over his food. No words, no praise-seeking, just a quiet act in a world where kindness had become rare. Especially from humans. She had always believed humans were weak and selfish. Oh, that's what she was taught. But now, she wasn't so sure. She pulled her cloak tighter and stepped out into the freezing wind. Her sharp eyes scanned the area. Guards were dozing. The night watch had grown lazy. Most didn't expect danger here, not tonight. Not when even the stars above looked tired. But Corin's instincts kept her alert, and tonight? Her instincts led her straight back to the human. He was still in the same spot. Sitting against the wall, but something was off. His shoulders were tense, eyes half open but distant. Karan crouched a few feet away, her voice low, rough from the cold wind. "Why did you do it?" she asked. Rian turned his head slowly, recognizing her from the food line. He didn't answer. Just gave a small shrug like it wasn't worth talking about. Karan stared at him, confused. She wasn't used to silence, not this kind, not from someone who just gave up their only food in front of dozens of starving strangers. "You could have eaten it," she said again. "No one would blame you." He looked at her, then to the stars, and finally spoke. They were smaller than me. That was all he said. But to Karan, it was enough. No speech, no fancy logic. Just raw, simple truth. She sat down beside him without asking. The metal beneath her was freezing, but she didn't move. The silence between them was strange, heavy, but not uncomfortable. Suddenly, a sharp sound cracked in the distance, something metallic, then a scream. Both of them jumped to their feet. Karan drew her knife. Rian reached for a broken steel pipe lying nearby. Instincts kicked in. No one screamed in the camp unless something was truly wrong. They ran toward the noise, weaving through half-built tents and stacked crates. Another scream echoed, this time a child's voice. They reached the dark corner of the camp near the food storage dome. A group of older teens had cornered too. Children, one of them, the same girl Rian had fed earlier. The boys were bigger, desperate, and furious. "Where did you get food today?" one shouted, grabbing the little girl by her arms. "You're hiding something," another growled. Karan didn't wait. She moved fast, kicked the nearest attacker in the side, and sent him flying against the wall. Her knife pressed against another boy's neck before he could react. Rian stepped between the kids and the last attacker, raising the pipe, his face calm but focused. The boy hesitated, then dropped the girl and ran. The rest followed, limping and cursing under their breath. Karan turned, breathing heavy, eyes burning. "You all right?" she asked the little girl. The child nodded, shaking, eyes filled with tears. She hugged Rian's leg tightly, not out of fear but trust. Karan noticed it, and it stirred something deep inside her again. The human slowly lowered his weapon, then crouched down to the kids. "Stay together," he said softly. "Don't wander alone at night." Karan stayed quiet, watching him as the children clung to his side. She had seen warriors fight before, but this wasn't about strength or victory. It was something else, something bigger. The human didn't just protect them, he made them feel safe. Like they mattered, as the night wind blew harder. Karan looked around the camp. People were peeking from their shelters, watching what had just happened. No one stepped in to help, but they all saw it. The human had defended their children without being asked. Without weapons, without fear. That night, Karan made her choice. She would no longer just watch him from the shadows. She would walk beside him, not as a curious onlooker, but as someone ready to stand with him. Because in a world where leaders shouted from high towers, this human led from the ground by sharing his food, by risking his life, by making strangers feel human again. And the strange part was, he didn't even know he was leading. Not yet, but Karan did, and soon, so would everyone else. The morning came slow on Tri-Ansevin, the sun barely rising through thick clouds of dust. Everything looked gray, lifeless, as if color itself had forgotten this place. Inside the camp, people moved like shadows, tired, cold, and hungry. But something had shifted in the air, something they couldn't name, not yet. Karan walked with quiet steps, her eyes scanning the path ahead. She wasn't just watching anymore, she was guarding. Beside her, Rian carried a bucket half full of clean water. He had woken up early and helped an elder fix a broken filtration pipe, not for payment, not for thanks, just because it needed to be done. When the two of them returned to the children's shelter, the little ones clapped their hands softly. Their smiles were weak, but real. One of the alien boys had drawn something in the dusty stick figure with long limbs holding a bar of food and children all around it. Karan knelt down and looked closer. "Who's this?" she asked, already knowing the answer. The boy pointed at Rian. "Him." Rian blinked, surprised. "That's not what I look like," he said. The kids laughed, and for the first time in days, their laughter didn't sound broken. Karan stood and looked at Rian. "You're becoming something here," she said softly, "whether you like it or not." But peace never lasts long in places like this. That afternoon, the camp siren buzzed 3 times fast and sharp. It wasn't a test. Karan stiffened. "That's a sector raid warning," she said. "They don't happen often, but when they do." She didn't need to finish. Rian already understood. People screamed as guards rushed to block exits. A small group of outsiders, mercenaries, maybe bounty hunters, were spotted near the southern gates. They were known for stealing children and selling them on black planets. Chaos spread like fire. Families tried to hide their young, others ran. Some just froze. Karan grabbed a small girl and pushed her into a supply crate. "Stay quiet," she whispered, then turned to Rian, who stood still, eyes scanning the crowd. He wasn't running, he wasn't hiding, he was counting. 1, 2, 3, 4 kids missing, without a word. He bolted toward the northern alley. Karan cursed under her breath and followed him. They found the missing children near a wrecked tower, too scared to move, trapped by falling metal. Voices echoed nearby, harsh, adult voices in a language Karan didn't recognize. But the tone was clear. Capture, take, sell. Rian moved fast, shoving the debris aside with bare hands. Sharp edges cut into his arms, but he didn't slow down. Karan covered him. Blade ready, heart pounding, 2 figures appeared from the dust hall. Armored rifles raised. They weren't guards, and they weren't here to help. "Take the human alive," one of them said. "Alien kids are worth half, but he might fetch." Morion didn't stop. He grabbed the nearest child and tossed her to Karan. "Run," he said. She hesitated only for a second, then caught the girl and backed away slowly. "I'll come back," she said, but Rian wasn't listening anymore. He turned and faced the 2 men, empty hands raised, bleeding from his arms. But his stance steady. One of the bounty hunters stepped closer. Gun pointed at Rian's chest. "Easy money," he grinned. What happened next was fast, brutal, and unexpected. Rian ducked low, grabbed a loose cable from the ground, and swung it into the man's face. Sparks flew. The other raised his gun butt. Karan was already there, blade flashing. The fight ended in seconds, both attackers down. Breathing but unconscious, Karan stared at Rian. "That was reckless," she said. "You could have died." Rian wiped the blood from his arm. "So." Could they? He answered, behind them. The children peeked from cover. Wide-eyed, one of them whispered, "He fought for us." When they returned to camp, bruised and dusty, more people were watching than before. Not just the kids, but adults too. Silent, curious. A few even nodded, as if something old and sacred had been witnessed later that night. Karan sat beside Rian near the edge of camp. She didn't speak for a long time. Then finally said, "You're not from here, not part of our clans. But you're doing what no leader here has done." Rian didn't reply, but she wasn't finished. "They don't follow titles anymore. They follow actions." He looked at her tired eyes, shining just a little. "I'm just trying to help," he said. Karan smiled. "A rare thing on Tryon 7, that's why they'll follow you," she said. "Because you're not trying to lead." And in the distance, where the broken shelter walls barely held against the wind, small voices rose again, not crying this time, but singing, soft and low. And for the first time in a long time, Tryon 7 didn't feel like the end of the world. It felt like the beginning of something else, something quietly powerful. And it started with a human who gave away his food and risked everything for someone else's children. The storm came without warning. A wall of burning wind roared through the Tryon 7 camp, tearing through tents like paper and slamming loose metal against shelter walls. People scattered, some diving into dugouts, others dragging their young by the arm. But amid the chaos, one voice rose, not in fear, but in command. "Get the children inside the Cums bunker." Rian shouted, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. Dust stung his eyes. Blood still dried on his arms from yesterday's fight, but he didn't stop moving, didn't hesitate. Karan was already sprinting beside him, arms full with a wailing toddler. "You're not from here," she said between breaths. "How do you even know what to do in a sandfire storm?" "I don't," he answered, "but I've seen panic. And I've seen what happens when no one steps up." The Cums bunker was old and half buried, meant for tech storage, not safety. But it was better than the open air. Rian slammed open the side hatch as Karan and others rushed in with children. His hands trembled. Not from fear, but exhaustion. He hadn't slept in 2 nights. Inside, the air was hot and stale. The lights flickered. A dozen young ones huddled together, some crying, some quiet. One little boy reached out and took Rian's hand. "Will we die again?" he asked. Rian knelt slowly, met the child's alien eyes, and said, "Not while I'm standing." The storm outside howled louder. Ripping cables from the outer wall, someone screamed from a nearby tent. Karan moved toward the hatch. "I'm going to check the south fence." Rian grabbed her wrist, not hard, just enough to make her stop. "If you go out there, you might not come back," he said. She looked down at his hand, then back at his face. Wind howling in the silence between them. "And if I don't go, someone else might not come back either." She replied. He let go, and she vanished into the storm. Moments later, a sharp alarm rang through the bunker, not from outside, but from inside. Rian looked at the panel above the doorway. Blinking red, a message flashing in alien script. He didn't understand all of it, but one part was clear: containment failure. He looked around, saw vents leaking dust, small sparks near the power core. This place wasn't safe. Not anymore. Rian stood and spoke loud. "Everyone, listen to me." The children froze, wide-eyed. "This place is broken. We need to move. To Shelter 9. Follow me. Stay low, and don't stop, no matter what." They nodded, some still shaking, but they trusted him now completely. Outside, the storm screamed. But Rian led them through the madness, wrapping smaller children in his jacket, carrying 2 in his arms, ignoring the wind tearing at his skin. Shelter 9 was 2 sectors away, through mud, fire-swept sand, and metal debris. But he kept going. Even when his legs wanted to collapse, even when the pain in his lungs became too sharp to ignore by the time they reached the shelter's doors. Rian was barely standing. The kids rushed inside, helped by other survivors, but Rian fell to his knees, coughing, blood on his lips. Corin burst through the door behind them, face dirty, eyes wild. "Where is he?" She shouted, then saw him, slumped but alive. She dropped beside him, grabbed his face. "Why didn't you wait for me?" "I had to move," he said weakly. They needed someone later that night. After the storm passed, the elders of Tryon 7 gathered. They had seen it all from the first sacrifice to the last step through the storm. The crowd was silent as an old alien stepped forward and spoke. "This human," the elder said, "has done what none of our warriors would do." He looked at the crowd, then at Rian, who was sitting on a medical cot with 3 children asleep. Beside him, he doesn't ask for leadership, and that is why he must be given it. A murmur passed through the people, not disagreement, but agreement, slow and rising. Corin stood beside him. For the first time, she spoke not as a guard, not as a witness, but as a believer. "Leadership isn't taken by power," she said, her voice calm and strong. "It is given through sacrifice." And in that moment, something changed. Not just in the camp, but in Rian himself. He didn't want to lead, but he had already become something more than just a survivor. He was now the heart of something growing, something real, something that would not be forgotten. And none of it started with a speech or a flag. It started with one human, one empty plate, and a choice. The fire was set on purpose. It began in the storage zone where the precious ration packs were kept under tight lock. Flames leaped too fast, too high to be an accident. Someone had overloaded the power cells near the food crates, then walked away without a trace. Smoke rolled over the refugee camp like a second storm. Black and choking, people ran. Some screamed. Guards scrambled without order, spraying foam in the wrong direction. And no one noticed the small ones, the children, trapped in the far end of the storage dome, too scared to move, too weak to call for help. Except Rian, he was across the yard, helping patch up a damaged wire when he smelled the smoke. When he heard the faint sound of coughing, high-pitched, muffled, familiar, he ran. Past stumbling workers, past frozen guards, past the shouting counselors who argued while everything burned. He ran because he knew those sounds. Corin saw him disappear into the dome. Her heart stopped. She shouted for him, but the roar of fire answered louder. She drew her blade and rushed after him, but the smoke was thick, too thick to follow. Inside, the air was a furnace, the roof cracking with heat, walls glowing red. Rian stumbled through fallen crates and twisted metal, eyes burning, lungs raw, until he found them 5 children, huddled near the far wall, arms wrapped around each other. He didn't speak, didn't panic. He pulled his jacket over their heads one by one, lifting 2 into his arms, taking another by the hand. "You're going home," he whispered. He couldn't carry them all at once, but he'd never planned to walk out the front door. Corin circled the dome, searching for an opening, when she saw a panel blast off from the rear wall, followed by a hand, then an arm, then Rian, crawling through smoke and flame with 2 kids in his arms and another clinging to his back. She rushed forward, grabbing one, then another, pulling them to safety. "Where's the last one?" she yelled. Rian didn't stop, didn't answer. He just turned around and ran back into the fire. By now, others had gathered, eyes wide, no one daring to follow. The fire was too strong, the dome groaning like it would collapse at any moment. Seconds dragged like hours. Then, through the orange and black, Rian appeared again, cradling the smallest child in both arms, cloak burning at the edges, blood on his forehead. He didn't cry out, he didn't fall, he just kept walking until he reached The children placed the last one beside them and finally dropped to his knees. Karan caught him before he fell face first, pulling him back from the smoke, her voice trembling. "You idiot," she whispered. "You could have died." He smiled weakly. But they didn't. Later that night, the elders said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. Word had spread through every corner of the camp, through every broken tent and half-lit shelter. The human had walked through fire wise not for glory, but for children that weren't even his. And in the silence that followed, a strange thing happened. One by one, the children came to where Rian rested. They carried stones, small, flat ones, marked with the symbol of thanks, a custom older than the camp itself. They placed them in a circle around him. No one told them to do it. They just did, because they knew what he was, not a soldier, not a savior, but something their world had forgotten, a protector. Karan stood behind the circle, arms crossed, blade sheathed, her voice quiet. "You don't need a throne," she said. "You already have something stronger." He looked up, confused. "What's that?" She nodded toward the stones, the children, the watching crowd. "Loyalty." And across Trian Savan, under a sky heavy with ash and stars, a fire had been lit. Not in the domes, not in the rations, but in the hearts of the forgotten, lit by a man. With no home, no rank, no power, only a will to act. A human with scars, soot on his hands, and a place in their future, whether he wanted it or not. A battered drone dropped from the sky like a dying bird, its wings cracked, its beacon sputtering. The guards ignored it, assuming it was scrap from the wastelands beyond the perimeter. But Karan noticed the emblem scratched into its side. The side crest of the High Outpost Council, burned and broken. She pried the drone open with her blade. Inside was a recording crystal, flickering weakly, and a single line of coded text. "Outpost Varn is gone. Only children escaped. Convoy heading your way. Prepare by mid-morning." The camp was no longer quiet. The gates opened to the sight of 24 alien children, skin gray with dust, eyes wide with shock, some limping, some carried by older ones. They had walked through the night, following emergency beacons, hungry, silent, afraid. The guards hesitated. Counselors whispered. Resources were already thin, space already tight, and these were strangers' burdens. Some said risks, others added, but before a decision could be made, Rian stepped through the gate. No armor, no title, just torn boots and a bandage on his neck. He walked past the arguing leaders, knelt down before the smallest girl in the group, and offered her water. "Welcome," he said, as if it was the simplest word in the world. Karan saw it happen, saw how the children behind the girl slowly stepped forward, drawn not by orders or signs, but by the calm in his voice, the steadiness in his presence. And she saw something else, too, the way their own camp's children moved closer to the newcomers, touching their hands, offering broken toys, pieces of bread, spaces beside them. By the time the council had finished arguing, the decision had already been made, not by vote, but by the people themselves. That night, the campfires were closer than usual, more hands around each flame, more laughter, even if soft, even if fragile. Karan sat beside Rian, the firelight dancing on her face. "They would have left them out there," she said, voice low. "All of them." Rian didn't reply right away. He was watching two of the new children sleep, wrapped in his old blanket. "I would have brought them in anyway," he finally said. "I know," she replied, then paused. "You always do the right thing before the right thing gets permission." He gave a small smile. "That gets me in trouble." Karan tilted her head, her gaze steady. "It also saves people." A hush fell over the camp as an elder approached, robes trailing dust. The old one stood before Rian, eyes unreadable. "You speak no promises," the elder said. "You carry no badge, but you lead. More voices joined in agreement. Quiet but firm. Not by ruling, not by fear, by doing and without fanfare. Without drums or ceremony, they placed something in his hands, symbol carved from stone and bone. The mark of the first shelter, a title not given. In 1,000 years, reserved for one who had become more than a survivor. More than a fighter, a protector of all, even those who were not his own. Rion looked at it for a long time, then looked up at them. "I don't want to rule anyone," he said. Softly, the elder nodded. "Then you are ready," as the fire burned. Lo Karan leaned closer, her voice nearly a whisper. "You realize," she said, "you're not just leading now. What then?" Rian asked, still unsure. "You're changing what it means to lead," she said, and this time her voice didn't shake. Far above, in the dust-filled sky, the stars slowly began to break through, and below them, in the middle of a forgotten camp on a broken world, a human who gave everything without asking, became the center of something greater than he ever imagined. A deep hum echoed across the horizon as sleek ships cut through the cloud, ships not built for mercy, painted in black with red insignias that marked the elite forces of the Dominion Council. They hadn't visited Tryon Sveven in years, and when they did, it was never for kindness. They landed outside the walls, boots hitting the dust with precision, eyes hidden behind mirrored visors, weapons charged but holstered. Karan stood at the gate with her hand on her blade, her breath slow, her eyes hard. The soldiers didn't look at her, they looked past her, searching, measuring. Then one of them stepped forward, holding a small device. "We're here for the human," the officer said. His voice sharp like polished metal behind Karan. The crowd was silent, dozens watching from tents and shelter doors, and in the center, standing tall with soot still smudged on his shirt, stood Rion. He didn't flinch, didn't ask why. He stepped forward calmly. "I'm right here," the officer nodded. Scanning him, "You've been acting without council approval, interfering with population control measures, inciting unauthorized loyalty." He paused. "You've become a symbol, and symbols are dangerous." Rion tilted his head. "Feeding children is dangerous now." "Feeding is fine," the officer replied. "Inspiring them is not." Karan moved beside him, blade still unsheathed. "You'll have to go through me first." Then another voice rose from the back of the campan, elder's voice, old and cracked but filled with fire. "And me," then another, "and me," then another. And us children stepped out, surrounding Rion, forming a wall of small bodies, hands joined, eyes defiant. The officer looked around, and for the first time hesitated. "This is not permitted," he said, voice losing its edge. "This is not a rebellion," Karan replied. "This is a home." The officer raised a hand to signal the others, but Rion stepped forward. Placing a hand gently on his shoulder, "You came to remove me," he said quietly. "But I'm not a leader in the way you think." He turned to face the crowd. "They are," he said, voice low but steady. "They built this, not me. I just reminded them they were allowed to care again." The wind picked up, swirling dust through the standoff. The officer looked at the crowd, once more legions of different species, united not by blood, but by something older, deeper. Finally, the officer lowered his hand. "This will be reported," he said, and turned. They left without firing a shot, their ships rising like ghosts into the sky. Silence followed, then a slow cheer, soft at first, then louder, stronger. Karan turned to Rion, her eyes shining with something rare hope. "You didn't fight them with weapons," she said. "I didn't have to," he replied. "They're not afraid of guns. They're afraid of hearts that remember how to feel that night." The stars above Tryon 7 were clearer than they'd been in years, and around the central fire, people gathered not for food, not for warmth, but for something harder to find in a galaxy gone cold. They came for the human who gave away his last meal, who stood in fire for strangers, who carried no flag but carried children on his back. And Karan sat beside him, hand resting near his, watching the flames they'll write songs about. "This," she said. "I hope they feed someone instead," he replied with a quiet smile. And somewhere beyond the stars, far from war and ruin, a small light had been lit. Not in space, but in the hearts of those who had almost forgotten how. To believe all because one human decided to go hungry so others could eat. And from that hunger grew a leader, not of armies, but of souls.